Let's turn to Frank Harris and look forward to your comments. We hope to get it up here.
Okay,
PowerPoint.
All right.
Good. She's on it.
All right. Well, I really like the sitting down format. That was more informal.
If you are going to stand,
Yeah, I might just stand over here.
let's make sure you got the mic so you can people
right.
can hear you.
Excellent. All right, this thing's on?
Yeah, it sounds like it's on. Good.
All right. Well, my name is Frank Harris. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I've been with MAD for the last 9 years and in MAD's Government Affairs Department and advocating for more effective drunk driving countermeasures in the states. And MAD, we're a 501c3 organization. We've been around since 1980. We're funded, I'm funded solely from private donors. We have others who are funded via some government grants to provide victim services. But today I just want to talk a little bit about MAD's efforts in the states to stop drunk driving. And I wanted to first just go over, this is just information on the totality of drunk driving deaths in the United States from 1982 to 2015. And you can see we've made progress, 51% drop or so in drunk driving deaths from around 21,000 to 10,300 in 2015. But there's still 10,300 people being killed every year from this 100% preventable violent crime. And there is definitely more room for progress. And MAD in the last decade, we've been working to not only reduce drunk driving, but to eliminate drunk driving through our campaign to eliminate drunk driving. And there has been progress in the last decade. Some of that's the economy. We like to think some of that's for another reason, which I'll go into in a little bit here. And another thing I wanted to look at too is just, and NHTSA looks at this a lot, is the drunk driving deaths per 100 million vehicles miles traveled. And I put another chart together just looking back to 1982 to 2015, just the reduction. And it's quite dramatic, even though this line, does this have a pointer on it? This line right here is the VMT. It's vehicles miles traveled has more than doubled or went up 100%. So yeah, drunk driving deaths went down roughly 75%. So there's been some progress against drunk driving, but the bottom line is, yesterday I was in Florida testifying on legislation, and what came to mind to me was a victim who testified. He said, I'm not a statistic, and that's what MAD. We don't treat drunk drivers or victims as statistics. We treat them as victims. So. The last decade, MAD has been working on our campaign to eliminate drunk driving. A key component of our campaign to eliminate drunk driving is advocating for ignition interlock laws in the states. And we believe that this is the most effective way to stop a convicted drunk driver from getting behind the wheel. It is the only device out there that can physically separate someone from starting their vehicle. And since 2006, MAD has been advocating for what's called an ignition interlock law for every single drunk driver. And when we launched this campaign in 2006, only one state, New Mexico, had an all-offender ignition interlock law. Now there are 28 states plus DC that have these laws on the books. But this is ignition interlocks. They're a data-driven approach to dealing with drunk driving. There's peer-reviewed studies from the CDC looking at the effectiveness in reducing drunk driving deaths, or in reducing repeat offenses, and there are 67% more effective in reducing repeat offenses compared to license suspension alone. And why MAD likes ignition interlocks is because it is a physical barrier from separating someone from getting behind the wheel drunk. License suspension alone utterly fails to do that. So MAD would rather have ignition interlocks on a convicted drunk driver's vehicle, actually an arrested drunk driver's vehicle, as opposed to a restricted or revoked license. And that has been our major push in the states, is the use of ignition interlock. So I talked about the status of ignition interlock laws when we launched our campaign, and that's what this map shows here. Only New Mexico had an all-offender ignition interlock law in 2005. Most other states were discretionary. 5 states, the ones highlighted in low red, had no ignition interlock law. But by and large, the status of ignition interlock laws were discretionary. So if you fast forward to today, all that red is what MAD calls an all-offender ignition interlock law, and that's different than what the Insurance Institute, as well as NHTSA, describes as an all-offender ignition interlock law. And what we mean by that is, when we talk about all-offender ignition interlocks, we mean the only way someone can drive is via an ignition interlock during a license suspension period following a DUI or DWI, OWI, OUI conviction, whatever you call your drunk driving offense in your state. Or the other thing too is an offender is highly incentivized to install an ignition interlock. So there's been great progress in the states in a short period, within really a 9-year period. And with the progress, I mean, there's been some, I don't know how much these are correlated. There's been an increase in drunk driving and in ignition interlock use from 100,000 to 330,000 in a 10-year period, actually an 8-year period, 9-year period, excuse me. And drunk driving deaths, they have dropped. But again, so many different factors go into why drunk driving deaths go down. Some of it's the economy. But again, the major difference is the 225% increase in ignition interlock use during this time period. And I just have a handout for you all with some updated data that we have on ignition interlocks here. It's not here. So, Mike. So last week, MAD released our second annual ignition interlock report. Because there's all these statistics, all this different research on the effectiveness of ignition interlock, but we wanted to see how many times these devices actually physically stopped a convicted drunk driver from getting behind the wheel drunk again. And in this report, we looked at the last decade of data and the last year of data. And we got this information from 11 or 12 of the interlock manufacturers. And we looked at the number of times an interlock actually stopped somebody from driving drunk of a 0.08 blood alcohol level. And the interlock in the last decade has stopped 2.3 million attempts to drive drunk. In the last year, 350,000. And there are some restrictions to this data. For example, one of the interlock companies, their data only went back till 2010. So the number is probably much higher. And it should also be noted, an interlock actually will physically stop somebody from starting a vehicle if they have any alcohol in their breath. But we just wanted to look at the drunk driving attempts at 0.08. So I mean, if these devices are installed, they're effective in stopping people from getting behind the wheel and driving drunk. And there's been studies on, before MAD just looked at the reduction in drunk driving deaths on some of these states that have enacted these laws. Like in West Virginia, they've seen a 50% reduction in drunk driving deaths since they enacted their all-offender interlock law in 2008. Again, some of that could be the economy, but the major difference in their DUI law was the increase of ignition interlocks. But there has been studies. I think Dr. Levy released one last year showing a 15% drop in states with all-offender ignition interlock laws. Johns Hopkins released a study this year, more of a empirical looking at all the different data sets that go along with traffic fatalities, and they found a 6 or 7% reduction in drunk driving deaths. But there's still a lot of barriers to implementing these laws. And we had a report, our first report on ignition interlock looked at some of these barriers, and some of them is, and also some of these recommendations to overcoming these barriers. And it's really just having eliminating as many of the hoops as possible and really incentivizing the use of ignition interlocks. We're actually seeing a better effect at people going on an interlock if they're incentivized to use it, as opposed to judicial mandates. Because even if you have a law that says a judge shall order an ignition interlock, judges don't always do it. Or they might order the interlock, the offender might not install it. So we're seeing better luck when we incentivize the use of ignition interlocks for drunk drivers. And we're actually pushing 3 different laws this year that are doing that. But I just like to talk about some of our obstacles in pushing some of these laws. And time again, we get the misnomer that a first-time offender is just a mistake. It's the first time they've driven drunk. But the truth of the matter is they've driven drunk many times before. This is just the first time they've been caught. And a first-time offender, it's not the first time driving drunk. And this is just one thing we've been trying to get through over and over with lawmakers. And again, the issue we're still seeing in states is, like in New Jersey, lawmakers there thought, we don't want to replace the use of license suspension with ignition interlocks. New Jersey they favor license suspension. Yet New Jersey is one of 9 states that doesn't actually have an administrative license revocation law. License suspension there doesn't start till they're convicted. So there's actually a bill that was vetoed a couple years back because it was seen as weak on drunk driving because it replaced license suspension with ignition interlocks. But again, with license suspension, and there needs to be more data collected on this, the number of times people are actually caught on driving on a revoked license as a result of a DUI or DWI, but it's pretty staggering, the number of times people get caught driving on a suspended license. So again, license suspension with no ignition interlock is nothing more than a hope for the best approach. Hope alone will not stop drunk driving. Now, bureaucracy was mentioned earlier in a presentation. It's inherent to government. This is just a flow chart from Oregon on how their ignition interlock program works. Now, that being said, just trying to describe this would take a very long time, but this just really is indicative of how the whole post DUI arrest process works too. It's very complicated. And if you try to mandate or install ignition interlocks in this process, it even gets more complicated. So what this really means is there's a lot of stakeholders involved when you push for ignition interlock laws. And there's a lot of, even if you pass one of these laws, you have to go back to make sure that they're happy with how the law is being implemented. And that's what Matt's doing. We're going back to these states where we passed these all-offender interlock laws to fine-tune them, to make sure that they're overcoming this government bureaucracy. And we always run into these facts versus fiction. What states that pass these laws, they get overwhelmingly obsessed with monitoring of these offenders. Matt's viewpoint is the only time someone needs to be monitored is if there's a recordable violation or if they try to start a vehicle unequipped with an interlock. And with monitoring these offenders, probably the most cost-effective way to do it is to have a compliance-based removal component to the law, meaning like in Washington State and 24 other states, the last 3 months or so, if you have any recordable violations, such as trying to drive drunk multiple times on the interlock but you're stopped, then your time is extended. So compliance-based removal is a good way to make sure these laws are working effectively. It's a good way to monitor these offenders. And it's a good way to teach sober driving behavior, because one of the arguments against interlocks is once they go off the device, they go back to their drunk driving behavior. But that's why you need to have a strong compliance-based removal aspect, meaning that the only way they can exit the interlock device is if they prove sober driving. And these are just some of the concerns. The interlocked offenders at greater crash risk compared to non-interlock offenders. That was cited in a California DMV study, and it was recited last year. And the greater crash risk is just more similar to that of the regular driving population, meaning that their crash risk is only higher because they might get rear-ended at a stoplight. But that's conveniently left out of some studies that are more anti-ignition interlock. But there are still definitely some hoops to go over to make sure these ignition interlock laws are being implemented as effectively as possible. But with that, that's it. But there's more. The handout I handed out has some great studies on ignition interlocks as well in there. And thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.